In today's video, we have all the latest NHL trade talk around the NHL. Today, we're taking a look at a potential trade between the Ducks and the Habs for Trevor Zegras. We have a better idea now what the likely asking price would be to make that happen. We also have the latest rumors regarding the Avalanche, an update on Corey Perry, Steven Stamkos in Tampa. We also have an update as well in Minnesota. Would they consider moving Marc-Andre Fleury ahead of the deadline, as well as some players on the Los Angeles Kings. We also have a couple of big milestones that took place last night. One between the Kings and one in Minnesota, and several injury updates, as well as a signing in Chicago. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to go over here today. Some news, some rumors, and a few other things here in between. We had a couple big milestones here in the past 48 hours take place that I want to kind of go over. Marc-Andre Fleury, with a win last night, has become the number 2 leader in goaltender wins all time, now ahead of Patrick Roy, 552. Now, he's got a long ways to go to catch Marty Brodeur. He was asked if he had any desire to play to try to do that. He said he didn't imagine it would be anywhere possible because he'd have to play a really long time to do so. And, of course, he's in his late 30s now. So, a heck of a career. Hall of Famer for sure. Marc-Andre Fleury, one of the greatest goalies of all time, former first overall pick in Pittsburgh, has had one remarkable career, and nice to see him finally hit that milestone. I know the Wild have been struggling lately. They were due for a win, and certainly otherwise this milestone may have come a little bit sooner. And we also had a milestone in with the Kings and Trevor Moore. Of course, Trevor Moore has turned out to be quite a nice player for the Kings, who they acquired, of course, in a trade with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We saw the Kings and Leafs do a couple of deals back a few years ago, which obviously sent a few players from LA to Toronto, including guys like Jake Muzzin and Jack Campbell, Kyle Clifford, etc. Trevor Moore was one of those players in those trades that they did to go to LA. Obviously, Carl Grundstrom was another one who's worked out nicely as well. But Moore's really turned into more of their offensive output. They're leading the team in goals. Like, it's not just being a nice player. He's turned out to be a pretty pivotal player. Like, he's outscoring guys like Fiala and Dubois, etc. He's the first player from California, so first California-born player to score 20 goals on a team based in California. That's not happened. Of course, there's not a ton of NHLers from the state of California. There is a handful, though. It's a growing number for sure. And other players from California have hit 20 goals in the NHL. They just haven't done it playing for one of the California-based NHL teams. So certainly nice little perk there for Trevor Moore to say he's the first one to do that. Like I said, he's continued to grow and really become a nice pickup for the Kings. I bet you of all the players the Leafs moved out in the last 4 or 5 years trying to make runs for the Stanley Cup, he'd probably be one of the few guys that they use as like deadline deals that they might regret. He's really worked out probably better than they ever imagined, to be completely fair. We also had a signing today in Chicago. They've re-signed forward Jason Dickinson. He gets a 2-year deal, $4.25 million per year. Just in the last few days, we heard GM Kyle Davidson make mention because he was asked about the deadline, speaking to the media and what their plans were for the rest of the year. Guys like Dickinson and Mrazek and a few other guys that are pretty good pros. We're certainly at least generating a decent amount of interest from around the other NHL teams looking to add to the deadline. And basically what Davidson said was, we need to kind of analyze the replacement costs here too. If we're only going to get, mid to late round picks for some of these players, for example, and then we got to turn around and try to replace them. It's just the replacement cost might be too challenging. Some of these guys are really good fits here. And to be fair, sometimes you see players on a particular team in a particular situation just really excel, and they may not duplicate it elsewhere, and the team might find a comparable player that just might not work out as well. So why not keep what you have? The Blackhawks are already pretty flush with a lot of young players and a ton of draft capital. So if you're only going to get 3rd, 4th round picks, for example, maybe you're better off to sign a few of these pros. We saw them sign Foligno. Now they signed Dickinson, and to be honest, they're throwing big money at them. They're never going to get this money playing on other teams because they're just not worth that much. These are above market value for sure, but Chicago has They have to get to the cap floor. They have not a lot of players to spend money on, and they're going to overpay for some of these pros to be the veterans to lead these young guys. So, if they can make a nice salary doing it, all the power to him. It's hard to turn that down. So Dickinson stays on a 2-year extension in Chicago. Some other updates around the NHL regarding some injuries. The Red Wings confirmed that Patrick Kane, he went back to Detroit. They're currently on a road trip. He left the last game against the Leafs in the first period with an injury, and he's going to miss the rest of the road trip. I guess, which is 2 more games. They're kind of hoping that maybe by the time they get back and get on a bit of a home swing, that he'll be able to play then. But he's still being evaluated at this point and seeing the Red Wings medical staff. But at the very least, he'll miss the rest of the road trip. So at least 2, could be more. Ottawa Senators forward Josh Norris is out again tonight. Did not skate today. I believe head coach Jacques Martin made reference to the fact that he was in the gym. So don't necessarily think we should take that as a setback, but he's still considered day-to-day and will miss his 3rd consecutive game tonight as they host the Avalanche. The Flames today announced that Jacob Markstrom does have a lower body injury. Of course, he left practice early yesterday. There was a lot of talk again about trades popping up, and every time something goes on with Markstrom, it seems like it's getting a lot of attention, and the trade talk picks up, but it was not the case. Actually, he was dealing with an injury. Today they've announced he's day-to-day. It's a lower body injury, and they have called up Dustin Wolf to replace him on the roster for the time being. So I believe the next game is going to be started tonight by Vladar, and Wolf will back up. In Winnipeg, they get Kyle Connor back tonight, which is a nice return. He's back. I believe that's a little bit ahead of schedule for him. So he's a very important player, so that's a nice boost for them. Gabe Vilardi is going to be a game-time decision. He's dealing with a flu bug. They're hoping he'll play, but not confirmed yet, at least as of the recording of this video. And Mark Scheifele has been retroactively placed on injured reserve, so he is going to miss a little bit more time before he can return. And in Vegas, we did get an update on Jack Eichel, which was one of the main injuries. A lot of people were kind of waiting to see, because this could be, good, bad, or indifferent here for the Vegas Golden Knights. Important player for sure. He did end up having to have surgery. We don't know the exact surgery he had. We know he was dealing with a lower body injury, and whatever it was, had to have surgical repair. He had that, and he's considered week to week. So probably fair to say he's going to be out a couple of weeks, but it could be longer. When I say week to week, I've seen that be 2 weeks. I've seen it be 10 days. I've seen it be 6 weeks. That means I think it's probably fair to say that they don't know exactly. And it's just, probably not a month, but probably more than a week. So that's why they call it that. So significant enough for sure, considering they have a big stretch here, which means he's going to miss the All-Star game as well, just like Connor Bedard. The NHL is going to have to look at replacing those guys at that event. Now, lots of different rumors around the NHL. One that's not a trade, but a UFA rumor on Corey Perry. Elliot Friedman talked about him again today on the Jeff Merrick show with the latest intel that he has on Perry. Essentially, he's saying right now that even though there appeared to be mutual interest from the Leafs and Perry in the beginning, that he doesn't think that it's likely going to happen, doesn't think it's going to work out. He personally wonders if Perry might want a quieter situation in a market where it's a little less, under the microscope than a Canadian market. But at the same time, he did say that there's huge interest from the Oilers, and they were doing their due diligence and kind of mulling over the idea of signing Perry before it was even announced that Perry met with Gary Bettman and had full blessing from the league to re-sign and continue playing. So we don't know exactly how things go between Perry and the Oilers or where things stand, but there's definitely appears to be mutual interest there, and I wouldn't rule out Tampa. There's also been word from other reporters that he may end up back where he played a couple of years recently with the Lightning, which is certainly a little quieter, like Friedman said. So I think that might be what he's getting at. So it sounds like Tampa or Edmonton right now are the more likely spots, but we've heard from other people that there's as many as like 15 to 20 teams that are at least wondering, thinking, doing some due diligence. They're not all going to be serious about it, so I'll be curious to see where things end up on that front. When it comes to the different trades around the league, the latest intel and rumors on that front, Friedman again today was talking about the Avalanche, of course, talking about the fact that their top 6 is now depleted further with the absence of Val Nichushkin, of course, who just entered the player assistance program. So clearly he's gone for an indefinite period of time. Normally it's at least a month. Sometimes it's longer. It boils down to what he's dealing with and when he gets released and when he feels he can play. So we're looking at least a month there probably. And of course, Arturi Lehkonen is already out longer term as well. That really, puts a big hole in their top 6. They signed Tomas Tatar to play a top 9 role. It didn't work out. They moved him earlier to the Kraken. So it's just, they are depleted for sure. Ryan Johansson, things been kind of hot and cold for them too. Thankfully, guys like McKinnon, Rantanen, I'm kind of leading the way here. No real kind of definitive timeline on if or when Landeskog is going to return. So Friedman's wondering that if they're going to get ahead of this and maybe rather than wait too close to the deadline, if you might see the Avalanche want to add a top six, and it references Elias Lindholm in Calgary, be a solid 2C for them. Somebody with a shooting mentality, which is good, could certainly strengthen that. And if they happen to get guys back afterwards, well, that's even better. Now, of course, they have to check their cap situation. That's going to play a role. Thankfully, Lindholm doesn't make a ton of money. They can use LTIR for Nichushkin while he's on the assistance program, but at this point, it's too early to say. We wouldn't be able to say with any certainty that he'd be out the rest of the regular season. That is not a given. Landeskog, I think it's pretty safe to say. They've said if he can come back, it would be in the playoffs. I think there's anywhere likely at all it'd be sooner than that. And Lehkonen, I think they're optimistic he could be back. Maybe sometime, I think, in March or late February. I can't remember exactly, but before the end of the regular season. So they have to kind of weigh their options here, but look for the Avs to make a move. They're getting depleted here. That top spot in the Central Division is going to be pivotal for the matchups in the Western Conference. And right now they're in a tight race with the Jets and the Stars. And if they slip, they could end up with a much more difficult, challenging matchup than they might have otherwise. So I suspect they'll be all over that. Lindholm makes sense to be a prime target. We heard from Tampa GM Julien BriseBois today saying 100% Steven Stamkos will not be traded. So he says you can stop mulling over that as a talking point and as a headline grabber. I mean, of course, he made it clear at the beginning of training camp that they will not even look at the contract of Stamkos until the end of the season. So it raised a lot of questions. And really, until today, we haven't really had any clarity and had any words from him to make us think otherwise. I mean, it's hard to imagine Stamkos going anywhere else, but at the same time, you have to think that, right now, they're kind of hanging on to a playoff spot, but they're certainly not in a firm spot. It's still possible if they had a bad stretch, they could slip out of the playoffs. And if they're out of the playoffs with a guy that they're not sure they're bringing back yet, why wouldn't they consider it, right? I mean, that's just how you do business. We know the Lightning have not been afraid to be ruthless in that sense, like Vegas. They make tough business decisions. And then, at the end of the day, they want to be fair to their people. And like a legacy player like a Stamkos or a Hedman, I think they'd have a little bit more leeway with. But, the same thing with Hedman. He's getting near to the end of his contract. I believe he's only got one more year past Stamkos, so they could look at an extension at him in the offseason as well. They'll have to weigh all that out, but they want to know the full future direction of the team, where each player is at before they consider that. He was asked about re-signing Stamkos, and he didn't make it sound like it wasn't happening or anything. He kind of made it sound like it was more likely than not. But a lot of that boils down to negotiations too, right? It just means that they are probably wanting to make it work, but it has to make sense for the team. So at this point, we can probably say Stamkos won't be dealt ahead of the deadline. I think there's still some uncertainty about his future in the team long-term going next year and beyond, but it sounds like there's certainly a lot of interest to make it work if they can. So we'll see where that goes. That's going to be a story to follow later into the offseason. I know as well with Minnesota, Friedman on the Jeff Merrick show today was talking a lot about the Marc-Andre Fleury. Of course, the milestone that we talked about a little earlier, getting the number 2 spot in wins for goaltenders. And he certainly, along with Merrick, was wondering about the future of Fleury. Of course, the Wild right now are out of the playoffs. I know Bill Guerin spoke to the media this week and certainly made it sound clear that he's not ready to throw the towel in yet. They certainly want to keep trying to get back in the playoff race. And, they're running out of time. It's just no secret. The longer it goes without getting a big win streak to get caught up, it's really, really hard. So it's early to say. There's still some time, but they did wonder about the future of Fleury. If they get to a point in the next few weeks here that it's apparent that the season is lost and playoffs are for sure not happening, they could easily look at themselves and be like, well, we don't really need Fleury. We can let Gustafsson run with the ball here. We can bring up Wallstedt, get him a little bit of action to kind of, start getting him NHL ready, and maybe we move Fleury. But it's not that simple. Marc-Andre Fleury has a no-move clause. We know he's been, from the time he left Vegas, he's been very reluctant to move. He almost didn't go to Chicago when he was traded there. He didn't have the trade protection at that point. So or at least he was able to get to Chicago without having to waive. And I don't remember, he might have had a modified. I don't remember if he did or not, but he did not have to be talked to go to Chicago. And he almost didn't report. And then once he got there, he really liked it, had fun. And then when they talked to him about going to Minnesota, he almost didn't want to do that. And I think later in his career, he's got a young family, doesn't really want to move his family around. But might be a case of a chance to chase one last Stanley Cup. Maybe the family doesn't relocate. It's maybe a case where sometimes you see players, they basically live on the road just for a couple of months, chasing the dream, chasing a Stanley Cup one last time. And who knows? It could be the end of the road for him. I mean, this has kind of felt like a last tour of duty for him around the NHL. A lot of spots he's been to, it's kind of, felt like a last hurrah. So it would largely be up to Fleury. I imagine if the Wild get to that point that they're going to be like, okay, like this isn't happening, they're going to have to talk to him, and they wonder if they would do it. But it's all going to boil down to Fleury. If he wants to, they will, because I guarantee you there would absolutely be interest. He doesn't make a ton of money. They could retain 50% for the rest of the year. It would not be that challenging for teams to add him. And if you take a look at some of the other goaltending options that's been mentioned as potential trade targets, hey, you got to say, like, this is a good one. So, we'll see what happens, but certainly a scenario to watch and see what he wants to do. Friedman also wondered today about Arthur Kaliev in Los Angeles. He's a player who's kind of fallen out of favor and hasn't played as much lately. The Kings are a team that's definitely expected to add. They've been on a bit of a losing streak lately. Goaltending's been questionable. Talbot's kind of slipped a little bit lately, but overall, for the most part, this year's been good. But now they're down to David Riddick being the backup, who was originally signed to be the number 3. They're probably going to want to add in that spot. They may want to add some more depth in the other areas. So they're a team that's expected to want to add and be, firm in a playoff hunt. And maybe the Kaliev could become one of those players they move to accomplish what they need to. I mean, he's a player that's kind of been, in and out of favor, you could say there. And they've got a ton of young players in the mix just kind of competing for spots. So I can see him being the type of player that some teams that have the goaltenders that are potentially available that would target. So it does make sense that Kaliev could be used as a trade piece. We'll see what LA decides to do on that front. And Trevor Zegras of Montreal, we talked about the possibility existing last week after the Jamie Drysdale trade. A lot of speculation began. I know I said it myself here in the channel, and then within a day or two, a lot of NHL insiders were saying the same thing about, what does this mean for Zegras? Does the future mean that he could be moved as well? And at the end of the day, I think it's very realistic that it could be. There's some people that don't think it's possible, some think that there is, and it's just going to be a wait-and-see scenario. I don't necessarily see this as being something that happens before the deadline. If a Trevor Zegras trade does materialize and he ends up getting shipped out of Anaheim, I see that being an off-season move more likely. We talked about him going to a couple of different teams here on the channel. There's been a lot of speculation that teams have inquired with the Ducks about his availability at the very least, and certainly what some packages would look like. It's believed that they're going to be looking for at least one younger player in return, and a couple of other prospects or something comparable in return. So at the end of the day, I seen an article suggesting what the price that Montreal would be asked for by the Anaheim Ducks, and it was believed to be a top young defenseman like Jordan Harris, a first-round pick, and probably another player as well. Another doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be like a B prospect per se, but like another decent younger player. So you're looking at 3 pieces for Zegras. They're going to want somebody who's a good young player to step into the lineup right away and help. A first rounder. In a Montreal's case, it could be in the upper first half of the first round if they trade that pick. That's what it would look like. So you got to know Montreal's got a lot of young defensemen. I don't know if Harris is one they really want to move, but they've got if you look at what's on the lineup there, and ones that are kind of fighting for playing time, what's coming, so you still got Reinbacher coming, you still got Logan Mailloux coming, you still got Jack-Eye, who hasn't been a regular lately, and then of course on top of it, you got Harris, you get Jaden Struble, you still got Caden Gooley who's there, and Barron and Kovacevic. Like they've got a lot, and then there's more coming, like Lane Hudson. So they're stacked. Could they afford to move a young defenseman? Absolutely, they could. And if it gets them a young dynamic forward like Zegras to pair up with Caulfield, why in the heck would they not do that? You could have a top line of Caulfield, Zegras, and Suzuki. I mean, that would be phenomenal. So would Kent Hughes do that? I absolutely think he would. But it is a big asking price. The problem here is not so much Harris or another comparable young defenseman on that team. Maybe it's Reinbacher they want. I would still consider it, to be honest. It's the first round pick I'd be worried about because, this point, well, by the time they would get there in the offseason, they'd know where the pick would fall. So it's hard to say. But anyways, it's an interesting deal. It's that's the price we're probably looking at. I'd like to know what everybody thinks. Should Montreal pursue that trade with the Ducks? And if so, why not? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.